If you enjoy stories that make your skin crawl and take your breath away, then this is the channel for you. Horror stories have become my refuge from nightmares and my portal to a world where sanity wavers and darkness reigns supreme. Join the horror enthusiasts and become part of our community of terror lovers. Discover endless stories that will make you question reality and keep you in suspense until the end. Subscribe, like, comment, share, and dive into a world where terror knows no bounds. The neighborhood where I was born was a place people avoided mentioning. Miserable and lacking everything, its inhabitants were not exactly the kind of neighbors you would want to have. It was a forgotten corner in the heart of the country where hope dissolved in the mist of dirty streets. There, life was a gasp between two bullets, and one had to live always face to face with death. I grew up in these streets between the smoke of burning tires and the echo of violent screams from dysfunctional families. When we were kids, we played dodging bullets as if they were raindrops. The square was a battleground where friends became mortal enemies. I remember my friends, one by one, falling, some because of bullets, others because of vices. I was lucky, or so I thought, because I joined a gang from a very young age to survive. But I saw many things I didn't want to see. As much as you wanted to leave there, the streets held me like a spider's web. Every night, fear accompanied me like a shadow. The sound of a speeding engine always gave me goosebumps, waiting for the first roar to take cover. When I heard the sounds, I would curl up in a corner and pray that it wasn't my turn. The days turned into routine, waking up to go out or trying to find something to do to avoid thinking about everything I had lost. I often looked up at the sky and wondered why we had to live like this. Why was such a small and miserable place so laden with evil and desolation? Far from appearing weak or nostalgic, I will tell you my story. What brought me to face terror in my own flesh, and how I fought to survive and follow a new path in redemption for my sins. But I will start from the beginning and say who I really am. My first name is Raul. Growing up in a neighborhood forgotten by God, where violence was the rule and hope was an inaccessible luxury. My memories are chronicles of fear and resistance. On gray mornings, I woke up to the sound of gunshots in the distance, signaling another body fallen in some dark corner. The smell of burning tires mixed with cheap food, creating a miasma that permeated our clothes and our souls. As a child, my friends and I invented macabre games to survive the brutal reality that surrounded us. We played dodging bullets, betting on who would be the fastest. It was a morbid competition, but it made us feel alive, even if only for brief moments. The square, our battlefield, was also where I witnessed the transformation of friends into enemies, driven by rival gangs or the simple need to survive. At 12 years old, I was recruited by a local gang. It was a matter of survival. Either you allied or you became a victim. I learned to handle weapons, to fight, to steal, but above all, I learned to distrust everyone. I saw things that a child should never see: summary executions, overdoses, bloody betrayals. Every day was a battle for survival, and every night, a dive into terror. The streets, with their dark alleys and treacherous corners, were a prison without bars. Fear was my constant companion. The sound of a speeding engine paralyzed me, anticipating the roar of gunfire. Curled up in a dark corner, I silently prayed that it wasn't my turn to fall. The routine became a cycle of despair: wake up, go out, fight to survive, and try to forget everything I had lost. The sky, distant and unreachable, seemed to mock our misery, reflecting an ironic blue over our shattered lives. I don't want to seem weak or nostalgic, but I need to share my story. What brought me to face terror in the flesh and how I fought to redeem my sins. I will start from the beginning and tell who I really am. My name is Raul, and this is my story. Navigating the terror of the streets where I grew up was not a choice but an imposition. Every corner hid a nightmare, every face a threat. Death loomed like a constant shadow, waiting to claim its next victim. My nights were filled with nightmares, but the days were even worse. An endless battle against reality. I was just a boy when I realized that violence was not a choice, but a necessity. The gang took me in, gave me a twisted purpose. I became a soldier in the urban wars, where every bullet had a name, and every day was a temporary victory against death. I realized that the only way to survive was to be stronger and more ruthless than the others. My first jobs were simple: delivering goods and collecting debts. Over time, I delved deeper into the heart of a criminal organization, a network of dark devotees who worshiped Santa Muerte and paid homage to forgotten gods, seeking their favor and protection. Each new recruit went through an initiation ritual. I remember mine with chills. It was during a full moon night, with the sound of drums and chants in the air. With all the satanic paraphernalia and devotees of Santa Muerte around me, I was marked with scars that I still carry on my skin. I had to eat a human heart of someone I didn't know, and of course, I had to end that person's life with my own hands and with a blunt knife. That night, I learned the true meaning of pain and the power that can be extracted from it. After that atrocity, my training was brutal. Every day was a struggle to prove my worth. The tests were inhumane, from enduring torture to making human sacrifices. In each act, I felt a deeper connection with the forces that guided us. The blood spilled was a tribute to our saints, and in each drop that flowed to the ground, I found a strange and morbid peace. Over time, I became one of the leaders, a feared and respected commander, leading a criminal cell under a boss named Beelzebub. Under Beelzebub's command, the rituals and offerings became more elaborate and bloody. There was no room for doubt or regret. Every action we took was justified by our faith. I firmly believe that our dark saints protected us and guided our hands in every act of violence. However, there were moments when, alone in the darkness of the night, I felt a shadow of doubt. Were we really seeking protection, or were we doomed to an endless cycle of violence, destruction, and death? The signal that sheltered us initiated a war for territories. The time came for the most diabolical and terrible ritual, one of the darkest and bloodiest our group had ever performed. I remember when we arrived at an old warehouse in the middle of nowhere, very close to the border. The moon illuminated the area with a pale and ghostly light, while the songs of my brothers filled the air, laden with incense and fears. We called upon Santa Muerte, our patroness and mother. But there was something more that night. The captured enemies trembled, knowing their lives were about to be offered to the dark gods. The sacrifice began early, and the blood began to flow in torrents, soaking the ground beneath our feet. Each drop spilled seemed to vibrate with an ancient and malevolent energy. But there was something very special that night. The blood on the ground began to move, gathering in the center, forming a large figure that grew larger and larger. I watched in horror and fascination as the liquid rose, forming a humanoid presence. Its face was an abyss of darkness, with two deep black pits that seemed to absorb all light and hope from the world. That thing seemed to be watching us. It was as if my soul was being torn out and examined. My companions trembled and screamed, some kneeling, while others, overcome by terror, began to flee, only to be mercilessly executed by the guards at the exit. There was no escape. The judgment was in progress. Those of us who managed to remain standing despite the fear were marked by the presence of that being. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, as if an invisible claw was scratching my heart. But along with the pain, a dark clarity invaded my mind. I could see beyond the veil of reality, discern the intentions and souls of those around us. At that moment, I knew we had been chosen, cursed with a gift that would make us invincible in the world of crime. That dark being transformed us, giving us superhuman abilities. Bullets seemed unable to hit us. We could see the spiritual world, identifying friends and enemies with terrifying clarity. Thus, the Red Command was born, a group of soulless assassins, fierce in combat and feared in the underworld. Our reputation grew quickly. We were relentless, executing our missions with precision and cruelty, products of the curse we carried. Our small gang became an unstoppable force. We used our gifts to expand our territory and eliminate any threat that stood in our way. We became instruments of darkness, and our devotion to the dark gods granted us a power that no enemy could challenge. Today, as I write these lines, I know my path is sealed. From that moment, I committed acts that no man should commit. Each of them was a step in my ascent, or perhaps a descent into the hell I already deserved. My faith in Santa Muerte and the dark gods was the only thing that kept me standing. Every day was a battle, not only against our enemies, but against our own humanity. We invisible barrier, an unseen force that halted my hand. For the first time in my life, I felt a profound sense of conflict. The soldier's calm acceptance, his unwavering faith in the face of death, stirred something deep within me. It was as if his prayers reached a part of my soul I had long thought dead. I lowered my weapon and stepped back, allowing the soldier to live. In that moment, I realized that despite the darkness I had embraced, A flicker of humanity still remained within me. The battle ended in our favor, but I was forever changed. The taste of blood and victory now felt hollow, and the shadows that once empowered me now seemed to choke my spirit. Days turned. I began to question everything, my faith, my actions, and the path I had chosen. My brothers in arms noticed the change in me, sensing my growing hesitation and inner turmoil. Whispers of betrayal and weakness began to circulate, and I knew my time with the Comando Vermelho was coming to an end. One night, unable to bear the weight of my conscience any longer, I made a decision. I slipped away from the hideout, leaving behind everything I knew. The journey to redemption was long and arduous, filled with moments of doubt and fear. I wandered aimlessly, avoiding my former allies and seeking a place where I could start anew. Eventually, I found myself at the doorstep of a small, humble church on the outskirts of a forgotten town. The priest, an elderly man with kind, weary eyes, welcomed me without question. He seemed to sense the battle raging within me and offered solace and understanding without judgment. For weeks I stayed at the church, performing small tasks and speaking with the priest, who imparted wisdom and compassion in equal measure. He taught me about the true meaning of redemption and forgiveness, each of his words a balm to my wounded soul. Slowly, I began to find peace in the simple acts of daily life, cleaning the altar, tending to the church's garden, and helping those in need. One day, a desperate woman came to the church, her eyes filled with fear and anguish. Her son had been taken by a local gang, and she pleaded for help. Something inside me ignited, a need to atone for my past by saving others. I mustered the courage and set out to rescue the boy. Utilizing the skills I had honed in my former life, I tracked down the gang's hideout and devised a plan to free the child without bloodshed. My knowledge of the streets and my understanding of the criminal mind became tools for good. I rescued the boy and returned him to his mother, who showered me with gratitude. The look of relief and joy on her face was a reward more precious than any power or wealth I had ever sought. When I returned to the church, the priest greeted me with a smile of approval. "You have found your path, Raoul," he said. "In saving others, you have begun to save yourself." My life took on new purpose from that moment on. I dedicated myself to helping those in need, always striving to atone for the sins of my past. The memories of my crimes remained, but I learned to live with them, using my guilt as a driving force for good. One day I received a letter from a soldier, the same one whose life I had spared during that fateful battle. He had discovered my new life and wrote to thank me. His letter spoke of how my act of mercy had inspired him to find peace and work to help other veterans deal with their traumas. His words were a powerful reminder that even in the darkest moments, a single act of kindness can spark a wave of positive change. Though I could never erase the horrors of my past, I knew that each day offered a new chance to make a difference. Living face to face with my demons became a lighter burden, for I was on the path to redemption. The darkness never fully vanished, but it became a distant memory, a shadow that followed me but no longer defined who I was. My story, a tale of terror and redemption, stands as a testament that no matter how deep one has fallen, there is always a chance to rise again and find the light. When I was a child, my father used to take me on his trips to various communities in Chiapas, although we lived in a small town. His work required us to travel frequently to supervise the delivery of materials and the training of teachers in remote locations. These places were often far from cities, where there were few students or teachers available to handle different levels of education in a single class. On each trip, I ventured alongside him, absorbing every detail and marveling at the communities we visited. However, there was one place my father always avoided taking me. No matter how many times I insisted or asked, he never revealed the reason. When I was younger, I used to speculate about what could be so terrible about that place that he didn't want me to see. I even thought he might be cheating on my mother with another woman, or that there was some dark secret he didn't want to share. As the years passed, my curiosity only grew. Whenever he told me that the place was dangerous and not suitable for a child, my mind would run wild, imagining all sorts of sinister scenarios. I thought there might be armed confrontations or security issues he wanted to shield me from. Despite everything, I never lost hope of one day discovering what lay behind that mystery. Then, about 4 years ago, months after the pandemic began, things changed. Many adjustments had to be made to educational methods and programs, and my father's job became even more complex. The need to travel and move between different communities increased, requiring more supervision and training. On one of those occasions, he invited me to join him on a trip to that very place he had always avoided. I was eager but also a bit nervous, unsure of what to expect. We arrived at the village during the day. It was situated in the middle of the jungle, surrounded by dense and lush vegetation. The climate was humid but surprisingly pleasant. The immense trees formed a verdant canopy that filtered the sunlight, creating an almost magical environment. The village was peaceful, with simple houses and friendly people who greeted us with warm smiles. Everything seemed normal and welcoming, and I began to question why my father had never brought me here before. Typically, he preferred to travel to these areas at night, perhaps to avoid the intense daytime heat or to optimize his time. But on this occasion, the person who would be hosting us was not available to receive us immediately. So, we set out during the day, in broad daylight. The sky was clear and the road seemed calm. The scenery was so different from the stories I had heard that I began to relax and enjoy the journey. However, something unexpected happened. One of the car's tires blew out and we were left stranded by the roadside. It was a sparsely traveled road, and the silence around us was almost deafening. Time passed slowly as we waited for a vehicle to help us. Our only company was the distant sound of birds and the occasional rustle of leaves. After a few hours of waiting, a car finally passed by and helped us fix the problem. When we finally managed to continue our journey, it was already late and night was beginning to fall. The darkness enveloped the road, and the atmosphere around us became denser and heavier. My father seemed increasingly tense. His face, which had been relaxed before, was now marked by an expression of concern and apprehension. I could see that he was nervous, his hands gripping the steering wheel with a strength I had never seen before. I asked if he was feeling okay, and he responded with an unsettling silence. After a few moments, he turned to me and asked me 2 questions. First, he asked me to remain calm, and then he asked me to believe everything he was about to tell me. I was confused and anxious, trying to understand why he was so serious. It was then that he began to tell me about the road we were traveling on. My father explained that many accidents happen there at night, with drivers losing control of their vehicles and veering off the road. He spoke about a local legend involving a woman who appeared in the back seats of cars, visible only through the rearview mirror. Those who saw her lost control and suffered fatal accidents. The story was frightening and seemed surreal, but my father's seriousness made me take every word seriously. He told me that the first time he heard about this legend was when he was my age, on a similar trip to the same village. Someone had warned them about the woman's presence and what they should do to protect themselves. My father had followed the instructions and managed to arrive safely, but now he was preparing me for the same experience. He said that if he noticed someone sitting behind us, he would touch my leg, and I should not turn around, no matter what happened. My heart began to race. Fear and anticipation mixed together, creating an almost unbearable sense of tension. The silence inside the car was palpable, broken only by the constant hum of the engine and the occasional snap of the tires on the road. I tried to focus on something positive, but the feeling that something bad was about to happen was inescapable. The road seemed endless, and each curve heightened my anxiety. My father was completely focused on the road, his eyes fixed straight ahead. The fear was visible in his expression, but he remained firm and controlled. The feeling of anticipation was almost painful, and I forced myself to keep my gaze fixed forward, despite my mind wanting to look back. Then suddenly, I felt a firm touch on my leg. It was like an electric shock, and my whole body went tense. The temperature inside the car dropped drastically, as if the air conditioning had been turned on or the windows had been opened. I felt an intense cold, despite the heat outside the car. The presence in the back seat was undeniable, and the sense of fear only intensified. I tried to keep my gaze on the road, ignoring the feeling that something was wrong. Out of the corner of my eye, I could make out a figure dressed in white, with something black covering its face. I couldn't tell if it was a veil or hair, but the presence was unmistakable. Sweat ran down my face, and my body was paralyzed with fear. My father accelerated, trying to escape the situation, but the feeling that something was wrong did not go away. The silence inside the car was oppressive, and the tension was almost unbearable. Time seemed to drag on, and I could barely breathe. Finally, my father said, in a calm but visibly nervous tone, "It's over now, son." He removed his hand from my leg and slowed down. I saw the fear in his eyes, but he managed to stay in control. The rest of the journey was in silence, with both of us processing what had just happened. When we arrived at the village, the feeling of relief was almost tangible, but the fear was still present. In the village, my father explained that the legend of the woman on the road was well known among the locals. It was believed that the woman was a spirit who haunted drivers at night. Those who saw her lost control and got into fatal accidents. That's why he avoided driving that stretch at night, to avoid any encounter with the entity. In the days that followed, something strange happened. During the night, I heard a woman scream that woke me up abruptly. The wail seemed to come from a distant place, and I couldn't identify the source of the sound. My father also heard the scream, but none of the neighbors or my mother seemed to notice. The event left all of us unsettled and disconcerted. The most disturbing thing was that after the scream, cases of a deadly disease began to emerge in the village. There were no records of deaths related to the disease before the scream, but a few days later, several cases were reported. The feeling that the scream was a harbinger of death became even stronger. The sequence of deaths and illnesses was devastating, and the connection to the scream seemed undeniable. The experience left me deeply marked. The fear and the sense that something supernatural was involved remain to this day. Although I have never had another paranormal experience, the event left me with a persistent feeling of unease. Driving at night, especially on isolated roads, has never been the same for me. The warning my father gave me about not looking back seemed more relevant than ever. This is the story I wanted to share. Drive carefully and stay alert, especially at night. There are things that are better left unseen and moments that are better left unchallenged. The mystery and fear of the road continue to haunt me. And the story of the woman on the road serves as a reminder that the unknown can be more terrifying than we imagine.